I'm delighted to be here, given to give the announcement that everyone's been talking about in the news today, because I know there is concern about how long the man in the top job has left. I reassure everyone, I'm doing everything I can.
Wes Streeting demands sackings. When the health secretary goes on national television to call number 10 staffers juvenile and demands they get sacked for spreading rumors about him plotting to overthrow the prime minister, you know Westminster has descended into the kind of chaos that makes reality TV look dignified by comparison. Wes Streeting just did exactly that, and in the process, he's blown the lid off what might be the most dysfunctional government operation since, well, the last dysfunctional government operation, which wasn't that long ago if we're being honest. So strap in, because we're about to dissect a political crisis where the Prime Minister's own staff are apparently briefing against cabinet ministers, those ministers are publicly demanding heads roll, allies are warning of generational damage if anyone challenges the leader, and everyone's pretending this is all totally normal and fine, while the whole thing burns down around them. Welcome to Labor in 2025, where the chaos is coming from inside the House. Right, let's start with what actually happened, because the sequence of events here is absolutely wild. Number 10 officials, people who work for Keir Starmer in Downing Street, decided it would be a brilliant idea to brief journalists that Wes Streeting, the health secretary and one of the most prominent members of the cabinet, has a plan to force the prime minister to resign so he can take over himself. Just sit with that for a second. The prime minister's own staff went to the media to spread stories about one of his senior ministers plotting against him. Now, there are a few possible explanations for why they do this. Maybe they genuinely believe Streeting is plotting and wanted to expose him. Maybe they're trying to undermine Streeting because they see him as a threat. Maybe they're incompetent and thought this would somehow help the situation. Or maybe, and this is the really cynical interpretation, they're trying to flush out potential plotters by forcing people to publicly declare their loyalty. Whatever the motivation, it's spectacularly backfired, because instead of Streeting quietly backing down, he's gone on the offensive in a way that makes the whole number 10 operation look like it's being run by people who've never done politics before. Streeting's response has been absolutely devastating in its directness. He went on television this morning and called the briefing juvenile and self-defeating, which in political terms is pretty much the equivalent of calling someone a complete idiot. He said that every time number 10 puts these kinds of stories out, whether about him or anyone else, it distracts from Labour's positive message and stops them getting their arguments across. Which is absolutely correct, because we're not talking about Labour's policy achievements or vision for the country. We're talking about internal warfare and who's briefing against whom. But Streeting didn't stop there. When asked if he knew who was responsible for the briefing, he said no, but if he did, he would tell the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister would sack them. That's not just a denial, that's a challenge. He's essentially saying, I don't know who did this, but when we find out, they need to be fired. And he backed that up by saying that nothing grinds Starmer's gears more than Westminster bubble briefings to newspapers, and that the only time he's seen the Prime Minister really angry at cabinet meetings is when there have been briefings against colleagues. Think about what that reveals. Streeting is publicly stating that Starmer gets furious about this kind of thing, which means either Starmer knows about the briefing culture in his own office and hasn't stopped it, or he doesn't know about it and has lost control of his own staff. Neither option is good. If he knows and hasn't acted, he's weak. If he doesn't know, he's not in control. Either way, it suggests a number 10 operation that's either rogue or incompetent or both. When pressed on whether Starmer has lost control of number 10, Streeting was diplomatic but still damning. He said he wouldn't put it like that, but there are some people in Downing Street who evidently do not model the behaviors and style of leadership that the Prime Minister models. That's incredibly pointed language. He's saying there are people in Starmer's own office who don't reflect his values or approach, which is a polite way of saying they're undermining him while supposedly working for him. Now, let's talk about why all this is happening, because the context is crucial. Downing Street apparently fears a coup is possible after tax increases are announced in the budget later this month. They're also worried about losses in elections to the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, and they could lose control of Birmingham, the largest local authority in the UK in local elections. Those are all genuine political concerns that would make any government nervous. So the thinking seems to be better to expose and shut down any potential challengers now, before the budget lands and things get even worse. It's a preemptive strike designed to force people to publicly commit their loyalty before the political situation deteriorates further. The problem is that strategy requires a level of competence and coordination that Number 10 clearly doesn't possess, because instead of quietly neutralizing threats, they've created a massive public row that makes the government look chaotic and divided. And it's not just Streeting they're worried about. The operation to shore up Starmer's position is designed to ward off potential rivals, including Angela Rayner, the former deputy leader who was forced to resign, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and Ed Miliband, the Environment Secretary who's already been Labour leader once before. So we've got at least 4 potential challengers that Number 10 is concerned about, which tells you everything you need to know about how secure Starmer's position actually is. An ally of the Prime Minister has been doing the media rounds making the case for why a leadership challenge would be disastrous. They're arguing it would be reckless and dangerous, that it would destabilize the markets, damage relationships with allies like the US, and push up borrowing costs. They've said the party wouldn't recover for a generation if they went through a leadership contest just 18 months into government. These are serious arguments, and they're probably correct on the economics. Markets don't like political instability, and a Labour government tearing themselves apart would likely spook investors and push up interest rates on government debt. But here's the thing. If your main argument for keeping the leader is changing him would be economically catastrophic, you're essentially admitting he's not popular or effective on his own merits. You're saying keep him not because he's good, but because replacing him would be worse. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. The ally also confirmed that Starmer will not stand aside for Streeting or anybody, and that if challenged, he would stand again in any leadership contest, which is what you'd expect any leader to say, but it also suggests this isn't just paranoia. This is genuine concern that someone might actually mount a challenge. If there was no real threat, you wouldn't need to issue these kinds of statements. What's particularly fascinating about this whole situation is how it reveals the fundamental dysfunction at the heart of this government. You've got Number 10 staffers briefing against cabinet ministers, those ministers publicly demanding the briefers be sacked, the Prime Minister apparently furious about the briefing culture but unable or unwilling to stop it, and allies making apocalyptic warnings about what would happen if anyone dared challenge the leader. This isn't a government in control, this is a government in crisis trying to pretend everything is fine. And the really concerning part is that all of this is self-inflicted. There's no external scandal forcing this, no opposition attack that's landed a devastating blow, no unexpected event that's thrown everything into chaos. This is all internal labor warfare. Briefings and counter-briefings, plots and counterplots, all happening while they're supposed to be running the country and delivering on their manifesto promises. The comparison to previous governments is instructive. We've seen this kind of thing before with the Conservatives during their various leadership crises. The endless briefings, the anonymous sources, the warring factions, the sense that nobody's actually in charge while everyone pretending to be. It was exhausting then, and it's exhausting now. And the fact that Labour has fallen into the exact same patterns after spending years criticizing the Conservatives for it is almost darkly funny if it wasn't so depressing. What Streeting has done by going public with his criticism is essentially force Starmer's hand. The Health Secretary has laid down a marker. These briefers need to be identified and sacked. If Starmer doesn't act, he looks weak and confirms that he's lost control. If he does act but can't find the culprits, he looks ineffectual. And if he finds them but doesn't sack them, he looks like he's protecting the very people who are undermining his government. It's a no-win situation, and Streeting has put him right in the middle of it. The budget context makes all this even more fraught. If tax increases are announced and they're unpopular, which they probably will be because tax increases are always unpopular, the pressure on Starmer will intensify massively. And if Labour then does badly in the Scottish, Welsh, and local elections, the calls for change will get louder. Number 10 knows this, which is why they're trying to shut down any potential challengers now. But by being so obvious and clumsy about it, they've probably made the situation worse rather than better.